Boss monsters are some of the most fun and important parts of Yu-Gi-Oh, and it's had its fair share of iconic and powerful boss monsters throughout the years. However, just because a boss monster was good, doesn't mean they're still good today. So in this video, we're going to go over some of those boss monsters which have aged kinda poorly. And starting things off at number 10, we have Borrelsword Dragon. This is a dark Link 4 dragon monster with 3000 attack. It requires 3 or more effect monsters to summon, and has the effect where it can't be destroyed by battle. Once per turn on either player's turn, you can target an attack position monster and swap it to defense position. And then this card can make another attack this turn, and your opponent can't respond to this effect by cards or effects. When this attacks a face-up monster, once per turn, you can have that card's attack, and then have Borrelsword Dragon gain attack equal to the attack lost until the end of the turn. Borrelsword was, once upon a time, considered one of the best generic Link monsters, thanks to how good it was at letting you end the game. The ability to boost its already high stat of 3000 to way over 4000 and get a second attack in a single turn allowed Borrelsword to push for lethal on a lot of boards with just a little help. While switching an opponent's monster defense position did make this more difficult, having any other non-Link monster on your side of the field made this kind of a non-issue. But that was kind of difficult to do thanks to Borrelsword requiring 3 monsters for its summon. But it was by no means impossible. And often all you needed was just a way to convert your monsters on field into damage after dealing with most of your opponent's board. On top of all of this, Borrelsword was quite good at keeping you alive if you weren't able to pull off your OTK. Simply switching an opponent's boss monster to defense could save you in some scenarios, though this was less consistent than you'd like, because your opponent could just link their board away for their own Borrelsword Dragon and just OTK you right back. However, this card ended up falling off after a new Link monster came out and made it all but irrelevant. Decode Talker was everything Borrelsword Dragon was and more. This Link 4 only requires 2 or more effect monsters to summon and has 2300 attack. It gains attack equal to 1000 times the Link rating of the Link monster used to summon it. You can banish the Link monster from your grave or field to destroy a card your opponent controls, but you can only banish a card of each attribute once per turn for this effect. And also, all of its effects are spell speed 4, meaning that your opponent can't respond to you activating them. Access Code was a very powerful mix of effects, being able to out almost any board with its own after Link climbing, and being able to gain a monstrous attack stat. The only issue is that it can't quite reach 8000 damage on its own, but that was easily solved with the Monster Update Jammer. This card has a few effects, but the most important one is that if it's used to Link summon a monster, you can attack with that monster twice during each battle phase that turn. This makes Access Code basically as good as Borrelsword in terms of doing damage, and when you combine this with its ability to rip their entire boards, it's clearly the better option. However, Borrelsword isn't a terrible card, even in the modern day, which is why it's only number 10 on this list. You could still use it, it's just been power crept by a card that's much stronger. And at number 9, we have Decode Talker. This is a Dark Link 3 with 2300 attack, which requires 2+ effect monsters. It has the effect where it gains 500 attack for each monster it points to. And if a card you control is targeted by an opponent's card, you can tribute a card it points to negate the effect and destroy that card. Going back to the Link era once again, for a while, Decode Talker was maybe the most common Link 3 to see play. This was in large part thanks to how early on it was printed. During Master Rule 4, links were very important, as no monster could be special summoned from the extra deck to a zone that wasn't being pointed to by a Link monster or to the extra monster zone. This hurt Synchro, XCs, and Fusion decks a lot, so most decks had to consider generic links that had good arrows and strong effects, and Decode fit that bill perfectly. It had 2 downward pointing arrows, didn't have too many restrictions on how it could be summoned, so it could easily be Link climbed into, and its effect to negate targeted effects could save you in a pinch. It also could actually get to pretty high attack power values if you summoned 2 monsters to its zones, which was a weakness of early Link monsters especially. Of course, this was very much a product of the times. While Decode Talker was easy to make and had okay effects, it wasn't actually ever a linchpin in most deck strategy. So, as more and more Link monsters were printed, Decode Talker became less and less necessary. Of course, it was also hurt by Master Rule 5 loosening the restrictions on summoning from the extra deck, though this wasn't what made the card age badly. The issue with Decode Talker was simply that its effects were too situational. If you wanted to negate your opponent's monster effects, you could use Appaloosa, Bow the Goddess. If you wanted a stronger attacker, you could use Borrelsword Dragon or Decode Talker. Even if you're limited to only Link 3 monsters, cards like Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos, or one of its eventual retrains in Decode Talker Extend or Decode Talker Hitzel, all of which are way more powerful cards. Decode Talker is sort of a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none style card. Where there were few options around, it made a lot of sense to use it as your Link 3. But as decks have gotten more options for Link 3s or access to higher Link rated monsters or non-Link boss monsters, it's become less and less useful. And at number 8, we have Caius the Shadow Monarch. This is a level 6 Dark Fiend with 2400 attack and 1000 defense. It is the effect where, when it's tribute summoned, you target and banish one card on the field, and if it was a dark monster, you deal 1000 damage to your opponent. Caius used to be one of, if not the best tribute summons around. The Monarchs were all incredible cards when they were printed, but Caius had the best effect of them all. Banishing any card on the field was an incredibly valuable effect, thanks to how hard it was to stop banishing early on in the game. There were tons of cards to stop destruction, from the iconic Stardust Dragon to the classic My Body as a Shield. However, cards that prevented banishing specifically were a lot more rare. Your best bet for trying to stop Caius' effect was pulling the rug, which did work against all Monarchs, but had a very specific activation requirement. This counter trap can only negate the effects of cards that trigger when a card is normal summoned and then destroys that monster, which can be powerful, but is very much a callout for Monarchs specifically, whereas cards like Stardust and My Body as a Shield were generically playable for long stretches of time. Caius and the rest of the Monarchs would slowly fall off, but they did get some more support with the Emperor of Darkness structure deck. This deck gave Monarchs a ton of extra support as well as some retrains, and Caius' retrain, Caius the Mega Monarch, proved to be quite strong in this revamped Monarch deck. However, the original Caius wasn't made much more playable by this wave of support. Often the deck chose to play as few Monarchs as possible for more consistency, and usually played Kiraz the Light Monarch just because it worked when it was special summoned, and had the biggest impact on field when summoned. Caius is long past his prime, but with even more Monarch support on the horizon, Caius may at least live on through its retrain in the future. And at number 7, we have Machina Fortress. This is a level 7 Earth Machine with 2500 attack and 1600 defense. It is the effect where you can special summon it from your hand or grave by discarding machine monsters whose total levels is 8 or more. If it's destroyed by battle, you can target one card your opponent controls and destroy it. And finally, if it's targeted by an opponent's monster effect, you can look at their hand and force them to discard one card before the effect resolves. Fortress is a versatile and powerful card. Easy to bring out thanks to its special summoning condition, and has 2 forms of disruption if your opponent tries to get rid of it. The only way to out a Fortress without losing something is to use a spell or trap to remove it, or use non-targeting removal. And while this can happen, it's not exactly common, especially back in the day. Your opponent only had so many dark holes in their deck to cleanly answer Fortress. This matters even more thanks to how easy it is to bring your Fortress back over and over. An easy way to get Fortress into play consistently is to use a card like Machina Gearframe to either add it or Machina Force to your hand. Gearframe is mostly an 1800 attack normal summon that adds a Machina monster on normal summon, and Force's effects aren't super relevant here. The important thing is that it's a level 10 monster, meaning it fulfills the requirement of Fortress on its own. Once you have a single Fortress in rotation, every copy of Force represents a one-way card to reborn it. This is just an example of one way to get Fortress in play over and over. It's never been that difficult to do, and forcing your opponent to out a Fortress several times can drain them of resources quickly. This strategy has gotten a lot worse over time as the game has just gotten faster. Fortress has remained easy to summon, but summoning it is way more resource intensive than other ways of bringing out material for extra deck summons if that's what you really want, and targeted destruction has become a much worse effect over time. The hand rip is good, but decks have gotten far more ways to get around Fortress's downside as the game has progressed. And if you really need to, you can easily just play out most of your combo and then use something like SP Little Knight to banish it forever, and let them rip a card you don't need out of your hand. This is another card that has received a lot of support over the years, with cards like Machina Ruin Force being released to support the archetype, but they've only really seen very occasional play in other, better decks, rather than making Machinas competitive. If Fortress was just a little more proactive, it might see play even to this day, but the fact that all of its effects wait for your opponent to do something means it's just too easy to play around in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And at number 6, we have Light and Darkness Dragon. This is a level 8 Light Dragon with 2800 attack and 2400 defense. It is the effect where it's also Dark Attribute while it's on the field. It cannot be special summoned, and once per chain, when a player activates a spell, trap, or monster effect, it loses exactly 500 attack and defense to negate that activation. When this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can target one monster in your graveyard, destroy all monsters you control, then special summon that target. This effect has to activate even if you have no valid targets to special summon back with it. So anytime Light and Darkness Dragon is destroyed, your entire board gets wiped. This isn't that bad though, because Lad, as it was called, was one of the best boss monsters around when it was printed. This was far before Omni negates were more common. So being able to negate every card in the game was a huge draw for Lad back then. The restriction on special summoning the card didn't hold the card back too much either, as there was plenty of ways to fill the board with tribute fodder for Lad. The main deck that popularized Lad is Frog Monarch, a deck that used the powerful frog monsters like Swap Frog to send Treeborn Frog to the grave to bring it back into the rival effect, getting them unlimited tribute fodders for the likes of Monarchs such as the previously mentioned Caius, as well as Light and Darkness Dragon. Once Lad came down, it became very difficult for your opponent to play, but not impossible, because Light and Darkness Dragon is mandatory, as well as the fact that it loses attack every time it uses its effect. Your opponent could often just throw 2 cards they didn't mind getting negated at it to reduce its attack down to a more manageable 1800, and then simply normal summon a higher attack monster to destroy it. However, this does require wasting 2 cards, and if the Lad is your only monster on field, its destruction effect will at least allow you to keep up a board after your opponent finally deals with it. This is all to say that your opponent will almost always end up in a far worse spot than you are once they do finally out your Light and Darkness Dragon. And since they have very limited ways to play around it, this makes Lad a very powerful option. The main problem with Lad in the modern day is that not being able to special summon it is very problematic as a restriction. Being able to pendulum summon a Lad would be a very powerful effect, not to mention the multitude of ways Dragon decks could have summoned it out throughout the game. The normal summon has only become more precious over time, and being required to tribute summon out your Lad has made it more and more difficult to actually wield effectively. There is an improved version of the card, Light and Darkness Dragon Lord, that works very similarly and is a fusion monster. While it has improved upon Lad, it hasn't helped the original see more play. Light and Darkness Dragon is a card whose actual effects have aged pretty well, but whose summoning requirement has aged so horribly that the card still doesn't really see any more play. And at number 5, we have Judgment Dragon. This is a level 8 light dragon with 3000 attack and 2600 defense. It can't be normal summoner set and must be special summoned from your hand by having 4 or more Lightsworn monsters with different names in your graveyard. You can also pay 1000 light points to destroy all other cards on the field, which is not once per turn. Finally, during your end phase, you mill 4 cards. This is the boss monster of the Lightsworn archetype, and was a huge reason to play the deck. A free 3000 attack monster you could just special summon from your hand was already really good, and this summoning condition was pretty easy to set up in Lightsworns thanks to milling being their gimmick. It also isn't a once per turn on its summoning condition, so if you had lucky mills and drew all 3 Judgment Dragons, you could swarm the board with 9000 damage out of nowhere. This was made even more broken by its board wipe effect, which could answer basically anything your opponent had and leave you with giant monsters on board that they needed to answer immediately. You could even do this and then commit to your normal summon to get even further ahead of your opponent, which could help a ton when pushing for lethal. This combination of ease of summoning, amazing effect, and huge stats made Judgment Dragon an absolute house, and one of the best boss monsters any deck had around this time. Unfortunately, it and the rest of the Lightsworns ended up falling off over time. There are a lot of reasons for this, but 2 stick out above the others. For one, the speed of the game made Judgment Dragon's effect less desirable over time. More and more decks had cards that either couldn't be destroyed or just had floating effects of some kind, meaning that destroying the field was far less helpful than it used to be. Yes, you could blow up the field multiple times in a row, but if your opponent's monsters just couldn't be destroyed, then that didn't matter. Decks became more resilient to these kinds of effects and became better at punishing slow starts, which leads to the second issue with the card, which is that its summoning condition became a lot worse over time as well. While filling your graveyard with 4 different Lightsworns isn't that hard, it's difficult to do that in a single turn, which makes summoning Judgment Dragon early on pretty difficult. Sometimes you'll need your Judgment Dragon to be able to crack an opponent's board, but just won't quite be able to bring it out yet. Whereas if you were just trying to use a card like Black Rose Dragon, or one of the Nightmares, or any other more recent extra deck monster for your removal, you wouldn't be having this problem. The ability to do a lot of damage out of nowhere also doesn't really matter anymore, now that basically every deck can OTK. So just about every advantage that Judgment Dragon used to have has slowly been power crept into irrelevancy. Still, the card isn't that far away from being good. If the destruction effect was a quick effect, for instance, then this would be an insane card that people would try to make work despite being clunky by today's standard. Because a Zeus you can use 7 times is kinda crazy. Making it an extra deck monster that you didn't have to draw might also be enough to make it a strong option in the current meta. Judgment Dragon isn't a bad card. It's just not really something you can afford to be playing in the modern day. And at number 4, we have number 34 Utopia. This is a rank 4 light warrior Xyz monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. It can be summoned with any 2 level 4 monsters, and it has the effect where you can detach an Xyz material from it to negate an attack. However, if it's targeted for an attack while it has no materials, it destroys itself. This was the poster child of the Xyz era, and it had a very interesting history. At first, this was just a good card to summon. 2500 attack on a generic rank 4 was quite high, and negating attacks meant that it was very difficult to out by battle, a combination of effects which made it extremely powerful early on. So powerful in fact that it actually did need that downside to help balance it out at first. Of course, this would slowly get power crept to the point where generic rank 4s were allowed to do a lot more than Utopia did, with cards like Evil Swarm Excited Knight and Time Thief Redoer having much more powerful effects than Utopia, and no real downsides besides their attack stats if you really want to stretch it. To help Utopia catch up, and also because it was the protagonist's ace monster in the anime, Konami gave Utopia a ton of upgrades to help keep it relevant. We got cards like number S39 Utopia the Lightning, which can be ranked up directly over normal Utopia, in addition to locking your opponent out of activating effects during battle. If it was ranked over Utopia, it can detach 2 materials to set its attack to 5000 for that battle. This made Utopia a strong form removal for a period of time, able to beat over almost anything that could be destroyed by battle for the low cost of 2 level 4 monsters and a few slots in your extra deck. There was also number 39 Utopia Double, which was a bit of a gimmicky OTK, but it at least saw some experimentation and some tops. This card allows you to detach material from it to add a double or nothing from your deck to your hand, then immediately rank it up into another Xyz monster. Then you would double that monster's attack, but it can't attack directly this turn. You would go into normal Utopia to have it gain 5000 attack. However, you would then actually use Utopia's effect to negate its own attack, which would meet the activation requirement of double or nothing. This quick play spell card's effect can activate only when a monster's attack is negated, and allows that monster to attack again this turn, but its attack is doubled during damage calculation. So this allowed you to attack an opponent's monster for 10,000 attack, which was more than enough to OTK in most situations. Still, this did require playing a card in your deck that you never wanted to draw, and it took up a lot of extra deck space, so this was never that popular. Still, these rank up gimmicks kept Utopia relevant for a while, but eventually even these improved versions of the card fell off. There's simply better generic removal and OTK potential in the extra decks nowadays, so Utopia is largely unnecessary. While it isn't seeing much play anymore, Utopia did hold on to some competitive relevance for far longer than most would have expected. And at number 3, we have number 17, Leviathan Dragon. This is another classic Xyz monster, being a rank 3 water dragon with 2000 attack and 0 defense. It requires any 2 level 3 monsters, and once per turn, you can detach a material from the card to have it gain 500 attack. However, if it has no Xyz materials attached to it, it can't attack directly. Essentially, this is either a 2500 attack monster, or a 3000 attack monster that can't attack directly, which you can summon with any 2 level 3 monsters. At a time when Utopia was a good enough Xyz monster to play consistently, you can imagine that a monster that could so easily get Blue Eyes White Dragon stats had a place in the game. At the end of the day, being able to beat over your opponent's monsters still is quite a powerful option in Yu-Gi-Oh! And cards that excelled at doing exactly that had a place in the game for a very long time. Leviathan Dragon was one of the best in this category for a long time. During the early Xyz era, and for quite a long time afterwards, any deck that was capable of putting multiple level 3 monsters on field at once was at least considering playing Leviathan Dragon as one of their best options for generic removal. Unfortunately for Leviathan Dragon, it didn't get much love from Konami to keep it relevant. You can't rank Leviathan Dragon into anything relevant, and it didn't have any main deck cards that helped it out over the other Xyz monsters. So when it started to fall off, it fell off hard. Even at the time, the card did have competition. Cards like number 52 Diamond Crab King had a very similar effect, though that's a rank 4 and didn't permanently gain attack. rather just setting its attack to 3000 for a single turn. This did make it better in very specific situations. For example, if you needed to get rid of an Apocryphal Towers, Diamond Crab King could beat over it after a single turn, while Leviathan Dragon would get destroyed by its effect before it could do anything useful. The point here is that Leviathan Dragon wasn't necessarily the absolute best at what it was trying to do. So as more options became available, less and less players wanted to rely on it. By the time we get to Link monsters, no one was really interested in Leviathan Dragon anymore. Not because it was a bad card, but because you could just be playing cards that were just so much better. Leviathan Dragon is in a very similar spot to Utopia, except unlike Utopia, it didn't get any support to keep it relevant, causing it to quickly go from a fixture of the metagame to a complete afterthought. And at number 2, we have Goyo Guardian. This is a level 6 Earth Warrior Synchro monster with 2800 attack and 2000 defense. It required any tuner monster and any non-tuner monster to make, and we'll be getting back to that shortly. But it also had the effect where if it destroys a monster by battle, you can special summon to your field and defense position. It's worth pointing out that this was released in the very first set with Synchro Monsters, Duelist Genesis, alongside the likes of Stardust Dragon and Black Rose Dragon. The bar for a powerful Synchro monster was a lot lower back then, and Goyo cleared that bar and then some. In fact, Goyo Guardian was at the time of release the strongest Synchro in Duelist Genesis thanks to its combination of stats and effect. The reason the card is so strong is very simple. Goyo has a massive attack stat, one of the strongest of all of the Synchros in that set, only being out by Nitro Warrior with its effect active, which allowed it to destroy almost any monster by battle. This pairs great with its stealing effect, which allowed you to build a board while simultaneously taking away from your opponents. That's probably enough to make the card sound pretty strong by itself, but the more you look into it, the stronger it gets. The monster you steal isn't just a body on your board. It can be used for tributes for further synchro plays. Making something like Stardust Dragon can make trying to actually out Goyo Guardian a real headache. The worst thing about Goyo, however, is the fact that it's really difficult to play into. Anything you do that doesn't destroy the Goyo outright is pretty much a bad play. Set a monster in defensive position, Goyo's going to steal it. Normal summon, it's getting stolen. Make a synchro? Well, about half of those don't do anything and have less attack than Goyo, so he'll probably just steal that too. Doing nothing isn't really an option though, because it has so much attack, you'll be out of life points in a few turns. Goyo really puts your opponent between a rock and a hard place, as if you don't have a good out to Goyo, it's very difficult to not lose the game in just a couple of turns. This was so strong that the card was banned for some time in the TCG. The card is now legal at 3 copies, but not in its original form. It has now been errata to require an Earth Tuner, which essentially killed the card overnight. The number of good Earth Tuners in early Synchro era is extremely limited. The best tuners were cards like Debris Dragon, Plague Spreader Zombie, and Spore, all of which are very powerful and not Earth attribute. Having to skip out on the best tuners around was enough to kill the card when it finally came off the ban list, which is a real shame because it would have been fine at that point in the game. Goyo isn't an example of a card that was simply power crept out of the game, it unfortunately was hurt far worse than was necessary by Konami themselves. And at number 1, we have Blaster, Dragon Ruler of Infernos. This is a level 7 dragon monster with 2800 attack and 1800 defense. It is the effect where if it's in your hand or grave, you can special summon it by banishing 2 fire or dragon monsters from your hand or grave. However, during your opponent's end phase, if this card was special summoned, it bounces back to your hand. You can discard this card and a fire monster to target one card on the field and destroy it. And if it's banished, you can add a fire dragon monster from your deck to your hand. But you can only use one of Blaster's effects each turn and only once that turn. This is a member of the Dragon Ruler archetype, of which there are 4 in total: Redox, Tempest, Tidal, and of course, Blaster. Each of these monsters has a different attribute and has all the same effects with the attribute switched. However, they do have unique discard effects. Redox Monster Reborn something, Tidal's effect is identical to Foolish Burial, sending a monster from deck to grave, and Tempest allows you to add a dragon from your deck to your hand. We're bringing all of these guys up because they all sort of share the number 1 spot on this list together, as they're sort of a group deal. The Dragon Rulers were the core of one of the most oppressive decks Yu-Gi-Oh has ever seen, only dodging the tier 0 distinction thanks to spellbooks being similarly broken. The deck was able to make ridiculous amounts of advantage by discarding the Dragon Rulers for their own effects, banishing them for other Dragon Ruler effects, and adding more dragons to your hand, discarding those dragons for other rulers, and then using Super Rejuvenation to fill your hand back up after all was said and done. The discard effects of the Dragon Rulers allowed you to either set up plays or answer your opponent's board, and the bounce back to hand effect basically didn't matter thanks to being able to convert them into Mecha Phantom Beast Draco Sack to generate even more advantage. We're only really scratching the surface of what the deck could do here, as the deck was very flexible and had a lot of options from any given board state, thanks to just how many effects all of the rulers had, and how many options for searching you had between their banishing effects and the baby rulers, which could discard themselves in a dragon monster or a monster with their attribute to add one of the dragon rulers directly from your deck to the field. The deck was so good that all of the dragon rulers had to be banned, and it was the opinion of the majority of the community that they would never be able to come back. However, they're now all at 3 in some formats and even at 2 in the TCG, and there's no issue with them. So what happened? Well, the main issue is that, in addition to being power crept, the dragon rulers are kind of slow. While they do generate a ton of advantage, they usually do so over the course of several turns. You discard them for value, then either resummon or banish them for more value on your next turn, with cards like Mathmech Circular, Snake Eyes Ash, and Ice Raziel, which can let you go plus multiple cards at advantage in a single turn, while also having a good long game around. The dragon rulers just aren't all that scary anymore. The dragon rulers have had one of the biggest turnarounds of any cards, going from terrifying to just so laughably underpowered that even with future support coming out, most people are pretty sure that they're not going to do anything. This dramatic fall from grace easily makes them the #1 boss monsters that age poorly.